And we are recording. First of all, thanks to everyone who is watching this interview. I am going to be interviewing Derek Ehlmann, the author of Oddity High. For those of you that do not know, Oddity High is an anime inspired tabletop RPG along the lines of the melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya, the JoJo's Bizarre Adventures, specifically Diamond is Unbreakable. So there are a lot of crazy anime hijinks. You are playing as a normal student, but also you have this weird side to you. Maybe you are an alien, maybe a secret agent, a superhero, like a Sentai hero, rather. Uh, Thank you so much for being here today, Derek.
Thank you for having me.
Perfect. Now, before we get started, are you working in a particular project that you wish to promote, some new Kickstarter or something?
Um, the big thing that I'd want to promote is Oddity High itself, which is, what we're doing here as part of the interview. Beyond that, I guess, I don't really have anything. We're not really working on any new project at the moment. I have stuff that I'm planning on working on, but right now I'm kind of focusing. Well, right now I'm focusing on kind of taking a break after creating Oddity High, but then it's going to be finishing up on the backer and or the sort of the stretch goals.
Okay, well, that makes sense because I think that it was quite the endeavor. I've been looking through the document, and it's obvious that you put a lot of work into it.
Yep, I did.
Now, let's go to the origins. When and how did you get started with tabletop RPGs?
Okay, so with tabletop RPGs in general, I started back in high school. I believe that this would have been. I'm not sure if it was an anime club or just a more general club, but one of the clubs that I was in, one of the things that people were doing, because it was kind of a club where you kind of just chill. But one of the things people were doing was just playing a little bit of Dungeons and Dragons, and just saying hey, here's some pre-made sheets. You're gonna fight some gnolls, and then after that, I started playing in tabletop RPG games, mostly online at first, and I played bits of Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder, but a lot of other stuff. I think the first game that I was in a really big campaign for was Spirit of the Century, which is uh, a Fate game, which is very much in the vein of pulp, uh, heroes like Indiana Jones and that sort of thing. And then, yeah, after that, I just kept it on playing through, college until today.
Okay, and when it comes to anime, manga, were you always into that?
Um, I guess that would depend on your definition of, or yeah, I would say so. Um, yeah, I guess that really started kind of in middle school or high school. Well, growing up, I watched Pokemon and Digimon and other stuff that's the sort of thing where it's anime, undisputably. But when you're a kid, you don't really recognize the difference. And as far as the first anime that I really watched, that I was really cognizant of, yes, this is an anime. That would be Azumanga Daioh. That would have been back in high school, early high school or late middle school, somewhere in there.
I don't think I've watched that one. What's it about?
It's a slice of life series. It's very chill, very odd, very much kind of about nothing. It's one of those shows that's kind of hard to explain because there's not too much going on. But
It's a
in
show about nothing.
yeah, yeah, that's probably a pretty good description of it. I haven't watched it in a while, so I don't know how well it holds up. But I think I would still recommend it.
And what would you say is your favorite genre of anime?
Um, my favorite my favorite genre or my favorite.
Like a horror, anime, or comedy
Well, I
anime?
think I don't really know if I have a favorite. I do think I like the slice of life stuff more. Um, I do like obviously, I do like the sort of high school stuff with a bit of a supernatural element to it. But as far as any specific genre, I don't really have any particular favorites. Although, I mean, the best I can really say on that front is that I don't like most shonen.
Hmm.
But other than that, I'm a pretty generalist consumer.
And when did you come up with the idea of designing your own anime-inspired tabletop RPG?
Okay. Well, for let's see. So I've kind of I'm somebody who is a consummate GM. I'm always going to generally I'm the person running the games. I'm the person getting stuff together, and I'm the person who's like, hey, look at this new thing. Let's try it out. And also I'm somebody who basically always just throws out whatever setting that they've established and makes something new. And so it didn't take too long for that to kind of switch into a sort of okay, I can make a whole new thing. Well, whole new is kind of stretching it because it's a Powered by the Apocalypse system, and that's a very strong framework to work on or to work from. But as far as making an anime inspired game, the thing that inspired me to make this was it was my first sort of like the main inspiration for this, which is The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya. It was one of my favorites in high school, early college, and I rewatched it. And while the good parts are still good and they still hold up, there's a lot of stuff that has not aged well. A lot of stuff that's just kind of tasteless joke wise. And it's the sort of thing that kind of makes me, not just recommend it, wholeheartedly. Um, and so my kind of thought with that was, man, I would love to be able to tell this sort of story because, in addition to the melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya, a similar inspiration is the Persona games, which also, to a much lesser extent, have this issue of just like, okay, the base is really good, a lot of it's really good, but there's some moments that are just shit, just not defendable. And so I kind of had the idea of like, okay, I would love to be able to tell this sort of story, but I can't just make an anime, and I don't really have the skills necessary to like make my own comic or manga or whatever. But I kind of realized somewhere in there that I could, a thing that I could make that I could use to sort of build on for this was a tabletop RPG. And looking through, I did some research, looked and see what anime based RPGs there were, and none that really kind of fit what I had in mind for Oddity High. Like a lot of the ones that you find are, in my opinion, very broad. They're kind of tackling anime as a genre, and so with Oddity High, I wanted to kind of focus it in a bit more specifically on the setting and the sort of interweaving of the supernatural and mundane. And so, yeah, that's kind of I had this idea. I saw that it was sort of a niche to be filled. It was a unique product, and so I started making it.
So would you say that you went with Powered by the Apocalypse because of its flexibility?
Yeah. Partially it's flexibility, partially because I was already familiar with it, because this would have been during or immediately after I had finished running a campaign of Masks, which is are you familiar with it?
Yes, I've heard of it.
Okay. Yeah, and so it was just very much on my mind, and useful as a flexible thing. And I'd also seen some stuff about, because with Powered by the Apocalypse, there's the playbooks that you build your classes on, and I've been seeing some other games out there at the time that had a sort of a two playbook system, like what Oddity High uses. Like you have your two halves of the character. I think the specific thing was that the specific thing that really inspired me there was Pig Smoke, which is it's kind of like you're a college, you're a professor at a magical college. But you kind of have the two halves of your character. There are your sort of character archetype and then your department.
Now, when it comes to the character types and archetypes, was it an easy process, or were you thinking quite hard about, oh, there's this anime stereotype or this archetype, I should put it in the game?
I'd say that it varied. So the sort of vague, sort of genesis of the idea was that, the sort of thing I built off of was I wanted, sort of character types in the Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya to be represented by all of the other lives, and then sort of I wanted the main cast of Persona 5 in this case to be represented by the real life archetypes. And so that helped a lot of stuff fall into place very quickly. The earliest stuff was the brash, the space cadet, the model student, the otaku, and then on the other side, on the other life side, would be the vanilla, the henshin was the henshin was one of the ones that was just kind of this. People want to play it as magical girls, and so might as well give them an opportunity. But so I kind of had about 5 or 6 that kind of fell into place very quickly. But then after that, it kind of became a lot harder to just kind of help nail things down. And then another thing on top of that was that there were the backer playbooks. Because for the Kickstarter, I had it so that backers, if they contributed enough, could come up with a total of 4 playbooks. 2 real life, 2 other life were presented by left up to the backers to kind of provide. They lay out the very broad details, and I'd build the rest. And the 4 playbooks for those were the idol, the pragmatist, the experiment, and the shadow. And some of those left me extremely stuck. I believe that I want to say that the idol in particular, and kind of making that work mechanically, that might have left me stuck for most of a year.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure we will get into the actual development later. But yeah, sometimes it's very easy. Sometimes it's hard. And sometimes you have an idea of oh yeah, the space thing will be easy. And then then you actually try to build on it, and it's oh, there's nothing here.
And I imagine it must have been quite challenging to come up with those, the real world identity and the otherworldly crazy persona that you have in the background. Was it really challenging to consider both of the aspects of the player characters?
I wouldn't say it was that challenging. It definitely was something to keep in mind. Kind of keeping an eye on stuff, making sure that oh, if you try and make this combo, if these 2 abilities intersect, then you're going to have something broken. Or, if you have a playbook, if you have a real life playbook that's, very bad at talking to people, for example, and then you have another life playbook that's kind of where its core mechanic is talking to people, then you have issues. But generally it's not that hard to actually think of how stuff goes together. Although part of that would be because I don't have to. Like I don't have to think about each and every little case that people build that people might build because there's a lot. Like when you have 10 real life playbooks and 10 other life playbooks and all the various permutations. I haven't ran the numbers on that in a while, but I know it's just like a lot.
Now, when it comes to the sorts of scenarios, adventures that you can have with this tabletop RPG, would you say that they lean towards a particular sort of theme or subject, like, oh, this is the perfect game for comedy, or you could also run more serious scenarios?
Well, part of that is, well, the main thing about Oddity High is that it is not really, it's not a genre first game, it's a setting first game. That's the big thing. Like, that's a big thing to prioritize. And to an extent, you can basically tell whatever sort of stories that you'd want that could be set at, a Japanese high school with supernatural stuff going on. One of, and, and so that's kind of why I believe in this in one of the sections about the first session. One of the first things you determine is the game's tone. And so the options there range from, wacky, off the wall comedy to very serious. And actually, one of the bigger playtest games that I ran was are you familiar with the Higurashi?
Ah, yes, I've heard of it.
Yeah. So basically, that campaign was me getting together with the kind of my closest gaming group, people I trust, and we're like, can we run Higurashi in Oddity High? And the answer to that was more or less, yeah. Like as long as you have enough trust in your players to do
Stay
it,
in tone.
yeah, stay in tone and kind of not cross any boundaries. I think the game's very flexible.
That sounds great.
Mm-hmm.
And did you have a particular antagonist in mind when you came up with the game? You were thinking, oh, we need aliens as enemies, or we need government.
I would say I didn't have. Well, that's an interesting question. I think it kind of varied. A part of it was that, well, one of the big, or part of that was like, okay, let's look at all the bits of inspiration. Let's, kind of try and make sure we can make these work in that. And so for like one thing that I kind of had in mind specifically was that, well, for the Persona games, at the end of them, generally you fight a god, more or less. And so having that as a sort of, thing to build towards was kind of, what I had in mind as a quote unquote final boss. But one of the things I realized when I was making it was that what does that mean? What is there to, like, what doesn't, sorry, I'm trying to
Just
nail
sounds a
this
bit
thought down.
complex.
Yeah. Just kind of thinking about like, okay, what sort of villains do I want? Or like what does conflict mean? And it was kind of about that point where I was like, maybe it doesn't necessarily need that. Like this isn't like Oddity High can be a very combat light game, or like a game where combat's kind of not a thing. Or because like you can still have your characters face threats head on, but they can also that doesn't have to be blasting them with lasers or punching them. It could just be standing up for yourself. And so, as far as actual villains go, I don't know if there really is one. I kind of I kind of leave that a bit up to the players to do, which I don't, you know, part of me wonders if that's not the right call, but well, I mean, I'm also working on a setting book, and that's going to have a lot more for that sort of thing.
Yes, it makes sense because as I was going through the document, I thought, well, you could easily run a slice of life game with no major problems or antagonists, just handling some somewhat lukewarm or lighthearted situations. I think it could also be possible.
Mm-hmm.
Now, could you talk to us about the challenges when it comes to designing, developing, and making this game a reality?
Okay. So I think, well, do we want to narrow that question down a little bit? Like, do you want to just talk about, the actual challenges that come to making a game? Do you want to talk about more of the specific, hurdles I had to deal with Oddity High that weren't necessarily related to the process of creating the game itself?
Um, I think we could narrow it to when it comes to your personal life being affected by the entire thing. Like, oh, I had these trials and
Mm-hmm.
tribulations and whatnot.
Okay. Well, so for those who haven't been like, if you're finding out, if you're discovering Oddity High through this interview, uh, the thing about Oddity High was that it took 5 years from its Kickstarter to today to actually create, and which just kind of greatly bypassed my initial estimates for that. And so, just like so much of that was just like, right, I have this Kickstarter that I haven't delivered on. Let's, you know, make it work. Let's do our best. But so I think actually, it's two of the big things that I was dealing with kind of during the process was um, mental illness was a big one. Like, I was depressed. I had ADHD, both of which were untreated until basically last year. And so that made the process very hard at times. And, you know, between mental illness and, the fact that I had, by some objective metric, failed to deliver on what I promised, those at times made it very hard to work on this game. And so, just kind of, I never like I never really gave up on writing Oddity High for more than a few months at a time, but it was just a very hard thing to actually get done for me. And I'd like to think that I did my best to kind of keep people posted and let them know, like, oh, I'm scaling this down or what have you. And at one point, I think like 2 years ago, I was like, okay, uh, if you want to be refunded for the Kickstarter, just send me an email and I'll send you your money back. Yeah. And yeah, it just kind of was really hard to get done, but fortunately, I've managed to do so. And here we are.
And what helped you identify that you were going through those mental issues? Because there are people that do not pay enough attention to mental health. They are just going through life and they just put those issues aside.
Yeah.
And
Well,
sometimes everything comes crashing down. So it was great that you managed to identify it. But what was the thing that got you aware of it?
uh, therapy.
Mhm.
I ended up getting a good. I kind of had the realization back in like late 2021 that I was in a bad way. And well, part of that was that the depression, like, This is probably different for everybody that has it. But for me, there were times when I could tell, like, oh, I am depressed. I am in a bad state. It feels, notable. And so that kind of made me realize, like, well, that and, family history made me realize I should go and get this treated. And so, I went and, got a good therapist, and I got, medication. And the therapist kind of really helped to nail down the other thing, which was the ADHD, and which I think, having that undiagnosed was probably like the big thing, interfering with this game.
Now, when it comes to those particular situations, do you feel like you are overcoming those conditions, or have you been struggling with them lately?
Uh, like overcoming the ADHD and the depression.
Uh-huh. Well, to a certain degree, of course.
I think that I wouldn't say that I'm overcoming them, but I would say that I am treating them.
Oh, okay.
I would say, it's not really like, a thing you can just kind of, eventually get past. It's a thing that you kind of live with and, have to maintain, like, any sort of, chronic illness or disability.
I've actually met a few people with ADHD, and I think that some positive things come when it comes to dealing with the situation. Some of them have given me tips like, oh, well, because I have ADHD, I actually have to make a lot of notes on many things. And they actually copy their habits like, oh, well, that's actually really useful. And I start making notes. Another one of my close friends, he mentioned, you know what, if you use colored pens when it comes to designing adventures, I do it because I have ADHD, but you could also do it, and it's very useful. And I am actually doing that as well. Did you discover some positive things during your interaction with those conditions?
As for ways to handle it, I would say so. I've definitely come up with a few, strategies to kind of help with stuff. Although, admittedly, a lot of the sort of direct strategies that I've, been working on are more for doing stuff like housework as opposed to working on the game directly. But yeah, I don't know if I really have anything along the lines of, some sort of, anything I'd really recommend to people. I just, I make do.
Mm-hmm. And when it comes to the new setting book, how much have you advanced when it comes to the design of that book?
Or sorry, could you repeat that? I believe I.
Yes, the setting book that you are preparing for Oddity High. Is there a lot of progress to it, or is still like just the basic idea?
I so that varies based on the setting, because the book has 3 settings.
Okay.
One of and so far I've had a play test in one of them to kind of help really build that out. But as far as the others, I built stuff. I've kind of created the skeletons of some adventures, but I don't know how much of that is still good, because there came a point where I was like, okay, let's not work on this. Let's set it aside. Let's finish the core game first. And so I haven't really done like a really, I haven't really checked on it in a while. And so I think a thing I'm planning on doing in the near future is, setting a very, strong, concrete, okay, this is what I want out of the game. I want this many characters. I want this many places. I want to have, these 3 adventures available. And I want them to be this many words. And so I don't know how much of the setting stuff that I've written is stuff that would end up, culling for the sake of, having it be more having it be more, focused, or because it's something that I don't want to include, or it's something where I worked on it years ago and I don't think it's a fit for the game now as it is, that sort of thing.
And with all of that work, do you still have time to play tabletop RPGs, perhaps even other tabletop RPGs?
Yeah, I definitely do. Currently, I am. So right now, I am running 2 games and I am in a third. The 2 games that I am running are a Fabula Ultima campaign
Mm-hmm.
and a campaign of Animon. Have
I
you
don't
heard of
think I
that one?
played that one. Anemon, you said?
Yeah, it's a very much sort of Digimon, but in tabletop
Ah.
RPG form. I would definitely recommend it if you haven't checked it out.
Mhm.
Um, it is a great game. Just fantastic across the board. And that's a campaign that I've been running for like a year and a half now. It's been a
Mhm.
lot of fun. And then the game that I'm currently a player in is a Sentinel Comics campaign.
I actually have the core book. It looks really good, but I never played it.
I would recommend it. I think its character creation is really fun. Like sometimes if I just kind of have a bit of energy, I want to throw out something creative. I just open up the game and just like make a hero, and then make the hero. I write it down, and then I you know throw it back to the GM and saying like, hey, here's somebody to use in the campaign, possibly. Yeah.
And from the tabletop RPGs that you have played, is there like your favorite tabletop RPG, and or is there some sort of role-playing game that you really dislike, like the extremes, the ones that you like the most, and the one that you dislike the most?
The one that I like the most and the one that I dislike the most. That's Well, I think that the one that I don't know if I have one that I like the most out of everything. I think out of the 3 that I'm playing, you know, Fabula Ultima, Animon, and um, Sentinel Comics, those are all great. As far as a game that I just do not like, I don't know if I really have too much of that. Like, I don't know if there's any games that have really burned me in that regard. Um, I guess the closest that I would say would come to that is that for like 7 or 8 years, I was part of a Shadowrun campaign. It was
Mhm.
great. Made all my closest friends through it. Um, and I'm never going to play Shadowrun again because that is enough for one lifetime.
So it's more of a case of a burnout of playing too much.
Yeah, yeah. As far as like other games I dislike, I'd have to look and see. I'm not the biggest fan of like there's some things I'm not the biggest fan of. Like I'm I'm not the biggest fan of Dungeons and Dragons, for example. For and that's I don't know if any of my reasons for that are more interesting than the sort of things you pick up from talking to other creators and seeing how they think about the 800-pound gorilla in the tabletop gaming space.
Mhm. And when it comes to settings or game worlds, do you have a particular thing? Like, for example, it's obvious that Oddity High, there is this cool high school out of the ordinary setting.
Hmm?
But tell us about your likes and dislikes when it comes to game worlds or settings.
Okay, so I don't. So for starters, I don't really have any like existing game world that I would call my favorite, just because I'm very much somebody that whatever it is, I just throw it out and make my own. Uh, as far as stuff that I don't like, I can't really think of. Well, I guess are you asking more on like the general sense, or do you want specific examples?
Specific examples will be great. Please go ahead.
Okay. Unfortunately, I don't know how many of those I have. I guess I'm not really the biggest fan of a lot of what. I'm not really the biggest fan of the World of Darkness stuff. Although part of that is just because kind of early on, I got it in my mind that I'm probably never going to really play those games just because if I want to play urban fantasy, I'm going to use other systems. Because one of the early games I really got into was the Dresden Files RPG. And, at first it was that, and then it was Urban Shadows. And so, yeah, I just don't really have that much of an investment or care in that setting. I also don't really like cyberpunk in general these days. Both as a setting and we're both in like the genre and the specific IP.
Perhaps it's also related to because you played Shadowrun for so long.
Yeah, that's definitely a part of it. That's definitely a part of it. There's definitely some political reasons for being annoyed with cyberpunk as a setting, but that's not really anything I want to get into.
That was actually a very tricky question because I was thinking, do I actually dislike some sort of setting? But I think it's very difficult as long as you play a good session. I think it's very difficult to dislike a setting.
Yeah.
But in my case, I would say that personally, anything that is too mundane without nothing supernatural, magical, weird, I think those would be like my settings that I like the least. And I would still play them, but it would be like my least favorite ones.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, when it comes to, you said that you're almost always running games, almost like a forever GM, right? But
Yep.
when it comes to the player side of things, do you have a particular archetype or character class that you really like?
So for the longest time, I was really the thing I did was punch people. In the Spirit of the Century game that I played, I was had might as my strongest stat, and I punch bad guys and smash things. In the Shadowrun game, I played as a troll adept who eventually got to the point where I was rolling like 34 dice on a single punch if I charge it up enough. And yeah, that was kind of my thing. My other thing is, I guess my two things are like punchy guys and smarter women characters. Admittedly, a lot of that's not. I'll be honest though, it's kind of hard to really pin stuff down, just because I don't actually run that much, or I don't actually play that much. Rather, I run too much. That's almost the other problem. But yeah, I don't have that many data points. Although my character in the Sentinel Comics game that I'm running is not really based on either of those, because I'm currently playing a noir detective with ice powers named Cold Case.
That's good.
Yeah, and that's a very different thing. But that's been a lot of fun, just to because that's not really. I guess recently kind of found that I do like being a more thinky type of character in a game that's good for it. Like for Fabula Ultima, you can actually be extremely helpful in combat without making a single attack roll, just by
boosting and
boosting or hindering and studying other enemies to learn their weaknesses and that sort of thing. Yeah, I just think that's a lot of fun.
And now, before we wrap up this interview, do you have any other thing that you would like to mention?
Well, I do have a itch.io page that is currently wait, sorry, I'm looking through my itch.io page and I realized that I sold 4 copies of Oddity High on December 23rd, which is kind of, like, oh, how did I miss that? But yeah, I have an itch.io page. I can throw that actually. I can probably throw that in the private chat here on StreamYard. I'll link to that so you can look at it if you want. Yeah, I have that, which has Oddity High, and also has a bunch of single-player RPGs because this summer I was working hard on making those as kind of half, wanting to kind of, throw my RPG energy into something smaller, and also as a way to like get stuff for my graphic design portfolio in case I want to look for those sorts of jobs. Yeah, I have a bunch of nice little RPGs. Some of them are, pay what you want. Some of them aren't.
Could you also please type the name of the Digimon type of game? I got curious about that.
Sorry, I accidentally clicked on the wrong thing and muted you for a second. Could you repeat that?
Yes. Could you please type down the name of the Digimon style of game, because I got curious about it, the Animon or the.
Okay.
Because I'm going to look into it.
I could also probably find the itch.io page for that as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. 1 second.
So yes, while Derek is looking for that, as you can see, Oddity High is quite versatile. You can play in any sort of scenario. You can play something comedy-wise. You can play something a bit more serious. I really like that there is this influence of Persona as well. I actually really like the Persona games.
Oh yeah, the Persona games are great. They're not without their flaws, but the highs are very high, and like they're definitely like one of the 3 fundamental things that I would say is emulated by Oddity High.
Well, thanks for having this conversation with us, Derek.
Thank you for having me.
Very informative and quite entertaining as well. And to everyone who is watching this interview, please check out the links. I'm going to be placing all of the links that Derek mentioned in a pinned comment and in the description of this video. Well, once again, Derek, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And I'm going to stop the recording in 10 seconds. And remember, everyone, roleplay solves everything. Once again, thank you and see you later.
All right. Take care.